Everybody, welcome to the videos for my final picks for Week 16 of the NFL season over on DraftKings. This is a more finalized and polished version of the first look we do earlier in the week. And you got to keep in mind, a lot of this could change barring COVID news. Some of the guys I don't talk about, they could get activated off the COVID list and become good plays. Some of the guys we do talk about could get put in the COVID list and not play. So it's the new day and age of DFS these days. Just got to wait and see on some of this COVID news. As annoying as it is, it's kind of the new normal at this point, so we just got to get used to it. And I do want to mention, if you're watching this on Saturday, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Hopefully you have a fantastic day full of presents, cookies, family, friends, whatever it is you do on Christmas. I hope it's fantastic. But I'm loving the slate this weekend. I think it looks awesome. One of my favorite slates of the season. Everything's kind of lining up well. I think I already have an idea of where I want to go, especially in cash games this weekend. So I don't usually say that on Friday. Usually I'm kind of in the air on Saturday evening. But as of right now, I think we have a good setup, liking the plays that we have at each position, whether it be expensive, right in the middle, or down low. So it should be a fun slate. Definitely looking forward to breaking this one down. If you do find this video helpful in any way possible, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become a fish member over on Patreon. You know where to find it. Link can be found down below. Just don't cover the NFL, but the NBA, MLB, and NASCAR as well. And since we're close to the end of the month, if you do want to sign up, you can get this last week for free, as long as you stay signed up on January 1st. So if you want to check it out, that's probably the best time to do so. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks, just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you're new, sign over there, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. I think it'll be it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we will start with the quarterback position. I wouldn't say there's a lot of guys that like a quarterback this week, which is fine with me because I like when I have a more consolidated group. But whether you want to spend up or go down low or right in the middle, I think we have options this week. Up top, we have Justin Herbert, $7,200. I will say, more than likely, not having Austin Eckler does hurt him a little bit in the passing game, but Justin Herbert will be just fine versus Houston. We don't think we should have any concerns there. Herbert's been one of the best quarterbacks in football this season. I personally don't find myself spending up for Herbert all the way this weekend. I kind of like the other three a little bit better, especially in cash games, but I have nothing wrong with Herbert here. Over a 28-point implied team total. They are 10.5-point favorites. Don't really see the Texans keeping this game too close, which is really the only concern with Justin Herbert, but you shouldn't be scared of this defense. I know they've been worse versus the run than they have versus the pass this season, but I mean, you are not fading Justin Herbert because of the matchup or anything. The only reason you're not really playing Justin Herbert is either because of the price point, Austin Eckler being out, which, I mean, not a huge deal for me. He is well in the passing game, but I mean, we still got Mike Williams, Jared Cook, and Keenan Allen, or just the potential competitiveness of this game. Then drop down to Matthew Stafford, $6,700, one of my favorite options on this slate. I honestly have all these guys project at 3.4x for my projections this week, so it's not like I have a strong lean on any of them. Personally, for me, though, in cash games, I'm between Stafford, Hurts, and Huntley right now. Herbert's close to it, but I'd just rather save some money for guys I think are going to be in, maybe not shootouts. I think the Rams-Vikings game could definitely be a shootout. I don't think the Philly and New York is going to be a shootout, and Baltimore and Cincy could be. But I think Matthew Stafford's in the game that's most likely to kind of be a shootout here, which, you know, Minnesota's pass defense hasn't exactly been great this year. Their defense in general really isn't that great. And Stafford's got Cooper Kupp to get the ball to, and that's going to be a very popular stack this weekend. And even the secondary options in Van Jefferson and Odell Beckham Jr. and Tyler Higbee, if he's good to go, which I think we just got news that he is going to be good to go. And I mean, it's not a big deal for me if he's not, but it's definitely nice to have another pass catching option because I don't really want to rely on Kendall Blanton too much. And Higbee's a pretty solid pass catching tight end. But Matthew Stafford, do like the spot here. Typically around 300 passing yards, usually can get 2 to 3 passing touchdowns. And soft spot versus Minnesota, so do like Stafford a lot. 49-point over-under, which does not look amazing, but is one of the highest on this week's slate, and only a 3.5-point spread as well. Dropping on Jalen Hurts, $6,400. He was great last week on Tuesday, facing the Washington football team. Gets another soft matchup here versus the New York Giants. Not a team that's very good versus the run, and I mentioned the run for Jalen Hurts because that's why we play Hurts. If he gets passing touchdowns, I will take it, but if he can just have a solid day on the ground, as long as he just doesn't get like 40 passing yards, we should be good. And he did have 2 rushing touchdowns last week. I think both were on the 1-yard line. That can always be a bit fluky, but we know Jalen Hurts is always going to be a threat any single time they're in the red zone. And that rushing upside is pretty much unmatched besides guys like Lamar Jackson. So do like Jalen Hurts a lot here. Very soft matchup versus Giants. Just too cheap in my opinion at $6,400. I think he's a fine cash game play. You don't have to stack anybody with Jalen Hurts, especially in cash games. So if you are playing in tournaments, do like him paired up with Dallas Goedert quite a bit. Then Tyler Huntley, sounds like Lamar Jackson is not going to be good to go for this game. And that means Tyler Huntley would be in line for another start. And he's looked good for DFS purposes the past couple of weeks. I mean, over 30 DraftKings points versus the Green Bay Packers. He has rushing upside. He loves Mark Andrews. The guy hasn't looked terrible passing the ball. I mean, I don't think he's a very polished passer, but he can get the job done. But I'm mainly interested in the rushing upside because he's kind of like a Jalen Hurts, and he's a few $100s cheaper. He's basically Lamar Jackson at a discount, if that would make you feel better paying $6,000 for Tyler Huntley. Just think it says Lamar there, but I mean, you're getting the same thing pretty much. And at $6,000, I don't mind it versus Cincy. I'm not like, it's not a cakewalk matchup or anything, but $6,000 for a guy that I projected around 20 fantasy points. Pump it otherwise, that's going to look pretty good, and I think he's a fine cash game quarterback. Because anytime you can get a quarterback in the 6K range that runs the ball a bit, going to be cash viable as long as the matchup isn't absolutely brutal. Moving on to the running back position, I love the running backs this week because they're all cheap, and I love when it's a cheap running back week because that means we have flexibility pretty much everywhere else in our lineup. We do want to spend up a little bit and get contrarian. I don't think Cordell Patterson's going to have too much ownership just because there's like an allotment of just super good cheap plays. So Patterson's a good way to get different on this slate and a very good matchup versus Detroit. Not saying he'll be unowned, but people are going to be flocking to James Robinson versus the Jets. We have Ronald Jones with no Leonard Fournette. We have Justin Jackson probably with no Austin Eckler. So Patterson, not that he'll be overlooked, but I don't think he's going to be owned as he should be in a good spot versus the Lions, who have been terrible versus the run and running backs this season. Plus, we know Patterson heavily involved in the passing game, averaging close to 5 targets per game this year with a 15% target share and averaging around 10 rushing attempts per game. So we're probably going to get 10 to 15 plus touches in this game, which is perfectly fine for me under 7K, especially when a decent chunk of that is in the passing game. And the Lions, bottom 4 run defense this season, whether it be points per game to the running back position or just versus the run in general, DVA-wise. So like Patterson in tournaments. James Robinson, I mean, hard not to like him here. I mean, he saw the most touches he saw all season last week with no Urban Meyer. So we know he's going to get a bump with that, even though it's the same guy calling plays. So James Robinson has been officially freed. He didn't have a huge game, but he still had around 18 fantasy points. Plus the Jags, you thought they'd be winning in that game, but they didn't. They were trailing, so it did hurt James Robinson upside because they just really couldn't establish the run as much as they'd like to. But very soft spot here versus the Jets. Like, versus running backs this season, they've been terrible. Over 120 rushing yards per game, 1.5 rushing touchdowns, even 60 receiving yards as well. But dead last DVA versus the run, allowing nearly 40 DraftKings points per game, which is also dead last in the league. So James Robinson, $1,500, he is too cheap, should probably be around 7K this week, and the fact that he's not just screams value. He is currently my top point per dollar option at running back this week, even with Justin Jackson getting the starting role. So that's just as much as I like. That's just how much I like James Robinson this weekend. David Montgomery is an interesting tournament option. Justin Fields and Andy Dalton will be out. We have Nick Foles starting. We just got that news, and it's a good matchup versus Seattle. But they're going to try to rely on David Montgomery. He'll also get pass catching work. And Seattle does really struggle versus pass catching running backs. Not saying David Montgomery is like a Patterson out here or anything, but he does have a 12% target share on the season, and the Seahawks are still on the second most points per game to running backs, over 7 catches and 65 receiving yards per game. So David Montgomery, a guy that's probably going to push for 20 total touches in this game. You can sign me up at $5,700. I think he's maybe a better tournament play just because we kind of have like the chalk 3 running back. It's going to be Robinson, Ronald Jones, and Justin Jackson. But a guy like David Montgomery, Miles Sanders, Cordell Patterson do look pretty good in tournaments. Speaking of Miles Sanders, $5,600. He has like nearly 200 touches this year without a touchdown. The next closest guy I want to say is like 70. So at some point, the touchdowns will be there. He got screwed last week on Tuesday. He had a great game, well over 100 rushing yards. But then Jalen Hurts had 2 rushing touchdowns around the goal line. So that sucked, especially if you own Miles Sanders. But he still had a good game, and he had close to 20 DraftKings points. It's just, you like to see some touchdowns. But at some point, that'll happen. But they're 10-point favorites here, facing the Giants, playing at home. Pretty much checks every single box for me. He also had some passing game work last week, which is nice to see. And the Giants are bottom 5 DVA-wise versus the run, and 25th versus fantasy running backs this season. So Sanders in a fantastic spot. And if we didn't have so many good running back plays this week, I could see Sanders being a chalky option, but I don't really think it's going to be the case this weekend. Ronald Jones with no Leonard Fournette kind of speaks for itself. I wouldn't say it's a great matchup versus Carolina, but he had 2 catches last week in limited time, also had close to 10 fantasy points. Not saying he's going to be as productive as Leonard Fournette, but he should see a very, very similar role. And the Buccaneers even said it's time for Ronald Jones to get the lead role here and going to have pretty much all the work. So $5,100 on an offense that typically can put up a lot of points. The problem is no Mike Evans and Chris Godwin does hurt the offensive bit, so maybe they're not going to be quite as efficient, but you should still have plenty of scoring opportunities. If he's going to catch a couple balls and get 15 plus carries, hard not to like him at that price point. And then Justin Jackson, Austin Eckler is probably not going to be available. Just got put on the COVID list. I guess he could test out of the COVID list by Sunday, but it's just a wait and see kind of thing here. But if he's out, assuming that's the case, Justin Jackson, $4,200. Fantastic option. Too cheap. Facing Houston. Terrible defense versus the run. He should catch some passes as well. He's kind of like Austin Eckler light. Not nearly as good, but should have a somewhat similar role. And if that's going to be the case at $4,200, we got to take it, whether it be cash games or tournaments. And moving on to the wide receiver position, I try to keep this as simple as possible because if we talk about every single wide receiver, every viable wide receiver on the slate, we're going to be here all day. So wide receiver really just comes down to what quarterback you're using, what stacks are you looking at, who you're running back with. You just want to correlate these guys. In cash games, you can one-off them. Guys like Devontae Adams, who's not on this slate, but he's always a fine one-off option because he pretty much soaks up all of Aaron Rodgers' numbers. But really, just kind of coordinate who you're using at quarterback in the rest of your lineup. But guys I would one-off this week, guys like Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen, Antonio Brown, probably the best cash game options this week. Cooper Kupp's in such a smash spot. He's kind of breaking the model this weekend. I haven't projected like at 32 points. I got to trim that down a little bit because that just seems like an insane projection. But Cooper Kupp, having one of the best seasons of all time at the wide receiver position, hardly ever busts, typically always goes off. His numbers have just been insane this year. I mean, 116 yards per game, nearly 9 catches, close to 12 targets, a touchdown per game, and a 33% target share. And not to mention the fact that he is facing the team allowing the most points per game to the wide receiver position. So there is really no reason not to like Cooper Kupp this weekend, despite, or maybe just besides having high ownership. But even then, I would rather get different somewhere else. Just give me Cooper Kupp. We have all the value we want at quarterback, running back, and even tight end this week. We got to spend some money somewhere. Cooper Kupp is the guy that I'm doing it at. So very expensive, but I currently am projected to be the highest owned player on the slate, rightfully so. Justin Jefferson, if you are stacking the Rams up, running back out Jefferson. I think it's a fine way to go. Now Dalvin Cook, so maybe they rely on the passing game a little bit more. Sounds like Adam Thielen should be back, but doesn't really concern me too much. Just keep some more attention off of Justin Jefferson. And if you are stacking the Rams, like I just mentioned, guys like Odell, who's in a really good spot, only $5,300, he'll get plenty of targets. Van Jefferson's a good option. And Tyler Higbee, who I don't have listed at tight end, you could look at him as well. Keenan Allen, if you want to pair him up with Justin Herbert, sure, but you can't use him as a one-off. Should get peppered with targets. No Austin Eckler. 2 more targets to go for everybody else. Mike Williams can be thrown in the same category. He's a little bit more boom or bust. Keenan Allen, always incredibly safe. Mike Williams, more of a boom or bust guy, but do like the spot here versus Houston. Stephon Diggs, so the Bills are someone we have to talk about because they are without Gabriel Davis. Sounds like Emmanuel Sanders is going to play, and they're also without Cole Beasley. So that's plenty of targets to go around. It's like Emmanuel Sanders and Isaiah McKenzie, assuming Sanders plays, are all going to get a bit of a uptick in usage. So I think they're fine. The problem is the matchup's kind of brutal versus the New England Patriots, their third DVA versus the pass this season, and allowing the second fewest points per game to wide receivers. So not saying we have to fade them, but I would be cautious even though they are vacating a lot of targets. DJ Moore is fine as a run back option if you are stacking Tampa Bay, although without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, I'm not really looking to use Tom Brady, but I am looking to use some guys around the offense like Ronald Jones and Antonio Brown. Speaking of Antonio Brown, he's a cash lock for me. When you take those guys out of the equation, both guys averaging around 27% target share this season. I mean, the ball's got to go somewhere. And guys like Antonio Brown and Tyler Johnson should benefit quite nicely. And Rob Gronkowski will when we talk about tight ends as well. And Laquan Treadwell, Laviska Shenault is going to be out. And Treadwell's actually been pretty consistent the past few weeks given the price tag that he has. And he hasn't really seen much of a bump yet. The Jets are currently dead last 32nd DV versus the pass this season. So I don't think he's going to have a ton of ownership. But I like him quite a bit if you need some salary at the wide receiver position. I don't personally see myself having to go this low at wide receiver this weekend. I'm more so going cheap at running back. But if you need a cheap option, Treadwell does look the best as of right now. And moving on to tight ends, I'm probably spending down here, but if you do have the money to spend up, Mark Andrews with Tyler Huntley has just been insanely good. Like, I don't know what it is. I mean, I know Mark Andrews is awesome, but Tyler Huntley loves the guy. In the past 2 weeks, he's had 21 catches, well over 100 yards, 3 touchdowns. He's just been great. Now, he's priced accordingly, but if you have the money for Andrews and you are using Huntley, do like the stack there because he's the clear option to pair him up with. Rob Gronkowski sees a bump with no Chris Godwin or Mike Evans. I realize Gronk at $6,200 doesn't feel great playing, but he's been good this year in the games that he's played. So I think Gronk should definitely be on our radar. Besides last week, I mean, we're giving everybody a pass last week because it was just an absolute mess for the Buccaneers, but they should bounce back quite nicely. Dawson Knox, no Gabriel Davis or Cole Beasley. I think Dawson Knox maybe pick up some of the short yardage routes like Cole Beasley typically runs, so I think he sees a bit of a bump there. Dallas Goedert at $51 if you're using Jalen Hurts. He's my favorite pairing option with them, but you can one-off him. I have no problem with that. Dallas Goedert does project quite well. The Giants have not been good versus tight ends either. And he had a great week last week versus Washington. Jared Cook is looking like one of my favorite options as a cheap tight end this week. He is projecting well. Not really saying he gets a bit of a bump with no Austin Eckler, but there should be a couple more targets to go around. But Jared Cook, Houston's not been great versus tight ends this year, and he's just the guy where he's just always cheap. He's got a great quarterback. He's on a great offense. and he should catch a couple of balls, get around 5-some targets, and you just kind of have to hope he falls into the end zone. I mean, he can still pay off without getting into the end zone, but he can definitely smash value if he does. And the same can be said for the rest of these guys. Cole Kmet, Nick Foles is going to be in at quarterback. Hopefully he likes Kmet. We have not seen those two together yet, but let's just hope for the best here. But Seattle has not been good versus tight ends either. CJ Uzama, $3,000 versus Baltimore, another team that's been terrible versus tight ends. Should see around a handful of targets for him. Just seems a little bit too cheap in my opinion. And Blake Bell, if Travis Kelce happens to be out, we could look at Bell here. Not saying he's Travis Kelce by any means, but if he's going to get me a handful of targets at $2,500, it's not bad. It's not bad. I think we're going to see a bit of a split between him and Noah Gray, though. It'll probably be a bit messy, and to be honest, I'd just rather spend $500 more for Uzama, who I feel a lot more comfortable with. Travis Kelce, I think Blake Bell should at least be on our radars, because he is expected to get activated off the COVID list. He is currently on it. If he happened to be out, it would just be Noah Gray, and I think he's worth a dart throw at $2,500. And as for the defenses, I don't want to take too much time on this, but just try to find the cheapest defense possible. That's a favorite, shouldn't get smashed, and they look viable. So for me, that's the Falcons this week at $2,600. I'm currently projecting them to be the highest owned defense on the slate. Jared Goff is currently on the COVID list. They only have an 18.5 implied team total against them. They're 5.5 point favorites at home. Low over under, playing a bad quarterback, $2,600. That's my cash defense this week. Jaguars paired up with James Robinson. That's fine. Facing the Jets. Seahawks versus Nick Foles. Not my favorite because the Seattle defense isn't exactly great, but they're playing at home and they are 6.5 point favorites. Chargers versus Houston. No Brandon Cooks. They don't really have anybody offensively that should worry you. Chiefs defense versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Big Ben's always good for some turnovers and sacks. And the Eagles defense versus the Giants. 10-point favorites. Only 15.25 implied team total for the New York Giants there, which is the lowest on these slates. I think that's fine if you have the money for them. The problem is being able to afford them. That being said, I think that'll be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you would like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. You know where to find it. Link is down below. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks, just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you're new sign over there, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. I think that'll be it. I'll stop rambling. I wish you guys a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays once again. And I'll see you all for the lineup building and core plays video on Saturday.